Happy Sunday morning, everybody. I hope that you all are doing great. Can't wait to see you again in church, hopefully really soon. For this morning, I originally had planned on doing part 2 in a series called I Got Next. We all started that together last Wednesday. And instead of sharing part 2 of that today, I'm going to share part 2 this upcoming Wednesday with you all. For today, I wanted to just do a brief overview of the devotion that we've been doing this week. The devotion is one called Everyday Worship. I had to remember what it was called, Everyday Worship. And it's a really good devotion. I've really enjoyed it. Nathaniel and Jaden picked that out for us, so thank you so much for picking that out. And I'm just going to go through day by day and just give a few of the key thoughts. I thought there's some really good stuff in here. So day 1, really the big thing there was the definition of worship is this: what you spend the most time thinking about, doing, or giving the majority of your attention to. And that is a really good definition, and it's important to understand that definition to be able to follow along with all 6 days in this devotion. So I'm going to read that one more time. Worship is what you spend the most time thinking about, doing, or giving the majority of your attention to. And that is so true. And what we find also in this devotion is that we were made to worship. So God created us to worship Him. So it is in our nature to worship, but sometimes people get that wrong, don't they? And that thing they give the most attention to becomes something other than God. We really see that with sporting events or concerts where we see all of this emotion coming out of people. Or it could just be people decide to make the focal point of their lives something other than God because they're looking at what they value the most. And so worship can get done the wrong way sometimes by people. Day 2 goes through Romans chapter 1 and verse 25. Here's what it says. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator. So this talks about people who are not in God, people who don't follow Jesus. They make a bad trade, and they trade their worship for God with worship for stuff, like things that are created, right? And so that goes back to them making that decision that what they value the most in their lives is not God, but it's something else. And that's idolatry or idol worship, basically. And so that's something for all of us we should really be on our guard against. And at this point, I would challenge you all to take a second and really analyze what you value most. Analyze where you spend the majority of your time, your energy, your emotion, really what grabs your heart the most. Take a look at that and think about it and see if that's God. And if not, we can ask for His help. We can ask for Him to help us to turn from that. And we can begin to intentionally make the focal point of our lives God by reflecting on what He's done for us, by beginning to insert worship into all areas of our life that we'll talk about here in a minute. So day 3 talks about how do we worship God? Well, it's a response to who God is and what He has done for us. And that worship that we bring might look different to each person. God doesn't expect worship to look perfect. He doesn't expect us to say a certain prescribed words and say them perfectly each time. It's not like that at all. Our worship should be genuine and authentic, and it should be this reflection of how we look at God and how much we love Him, how grateful we are for what He's done for us. And that's what He looks for. He looks for that real authentic response to Him and what He's done. That's what worship should look like. Day 4, I thought was really good. I'm going to park on day 4 a little bit and talk about this. And this is a part actually from the devotion I want to read. Sometimes people walk out of church saying things like, I didn't really like the songs today, or I just wasn't really feeling worship today, or that singer or the band wasn't that good. It kind of took me out of it. Worship isn't about you or the band or the songs that you're singing. It's about carving out time in our busy lives and responding to who God is and what He's done for us. It's about a deep inner spirit response. So it's not about us, it's about God. And I think it is so, so, so important to remember that when we come to church and we want to have this corporate worship experience in church or now even online. The temptation for people can be to leave that experience and say, well, I didn't like this, I didn't like that. And I would just challenge you, if you find yourself leaving the main service or leaving youth group or leaving anything you do at church, and you find yourself complaining, like picking apart nuances about what didn't work for you, then I would really challenge you to take an honest look at yourself and say, are you making your worship experience about God and other people that you can bless there? Or have you reduced this worship experience at church to something that's only for yourself? So I think we should all look at that from time to time. Another area that this can kind of spill over into is just the attitude we bring to the table before we get to church. And this can especially be influenced by things that happen right before church. I'm sure most families have been on the way to church and there's been a little bit of a tiff or argument that happens on the way into church or whatever the case might be. I know for me, a couple of instances. There was one time I was on the way to church, gas light comes on, I better get gas. I'm pumping gas and I get it all over my foot. And I stink, and I had to go into church smelling bad, and it's just my attitude, my mind weren't there. I was just self-conscious and worried about it. Another time that I did this was just a few months ago, actually. I went to Casey's right before church, and I got Charity this like Frappuccino type drink, and the machine messes up, and it kicks the drink back, and it spills all over my leg. I had on brand new white Adidas shoes, all over. There's a huge brown mark all over these shoes, and I smelled bad another time going into church. And I would just say, listen, there's always going to be things like that which can happen on our way into church. The challenge is to not let that get in our mindset and get in our mood where we just get to church, and then we're just like this, our arms folded, and we're just completely taken out of the experience. When we get to church, it should all be about, how can I worship God today? How can I get my mind and my heart in the right place where I am here to worship and honor God for who He is? Because every time we go to church, it's an opportunity to worship God. I also believe every time we go to church that God has something for us. And when we have our heart and mind, our attitude in the right place by saying, God, this is for you, this worship experience is for you, then we position ourselves to be in the right spot to receive what God might have for us. And so our attitude going into church is so important in that. All right, so day 5 talks about making time for God. Listen, we have so many things pulling at our time, so many things trying to grab our attention with school and with work and with sports and band and then things to do at home, just entertainment with TV and iPad, all that, you get it. If we're not careful, we can let all those things just consume our time where we're busy doing stuff and we're not making time for God. And that kind of leads into day 6, the final day of the devotion. And it begins by saying this in Romans 12:1, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. So just stop and think about everything God has done for you. He sent Jesus to die for you. He has called you out of a lifestyle that didn't please Him. He has offered forgiveness for your sins. He has pulled you into this relationship where He gives you peace. And He's done so many great things for you. And worship is this opportunity to show Him that you recognize His greatness and that you are grateful for who He is and what He's done. And so what does that look like? It looks like giving Him everything. We don't want to just slice our life and compartmentalize it into different parts and just give Him this section, right? We don't want to go through our whole day and then only give God this 5 minutes at the end of the day to do this devotion. But instead, we have those times we set apart for God where we say, God, this prayer time, this devotion time, this worship experience at church is yours. But the challenge here is to look at every part of your life as an act of worship. So if you are sweeping the floor for your mom, if your dad has asked you to take out the trash, if you are doing schoolwork, if you're playing that game on your phone, you can look at all of those as an act of worship. You can invite God into those moments and say, God, I'm doing this mundane task, but you are with me, and I love you. Thank you for giving me the physical, the mental capacity to do these things. I'm going to do it to the best of my ability as an act of worship. And in that way, you're not segregating your life into different buckets and saying, this is God's and this is mine, or this is God's and this is different work. All of it's God's. All of it belongs to God. Our whole bodies and lives are an act of, we are a living sacrifice unto God. And so, listen, this devotion has been great. And I would just end by saying, hey, worship looks different for each person. Make your life about worship because God has done so much for you. All right, I hope you've enjoyed this devotion. We will announce the next devotion pretty soon. But we love you guys, and we will talk to you soon.